Okay, so let's see how much we get through of this one. So, the important thing with Marx, we'll start with Marx. The important thing with Marx is that in his model, economics drives everything. And I mean absolutely everything. And when he talks about economics, um, he's talking about the very stuff of life. He will talk about the means of production. He'll talk about uh, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. See, I've got my list here. He'll talk about the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, and surplus value, alienation. We're going to talk about those things in this video and maybe the next one. But economics drives everything. And so the reason we talk about the means of production is because he's meaning how we make a living. And that is literally, it's not just, well, I have a job and they pay me money. It's actually how do we make a living. And so if we go back to, some hypothetical, first man 100,000 years ago, caveman types, they're living in a small little clan. They're hunting, whatever they're hunting. They're digging up whatever potatoes they're digging up, and then they're building houses. Like actually getting food, making shelter, getting water. That's all that stuff is stuff we need to do to make a living. And so for Marx, when he talks about the means of production, he means producing that life. And part of the reason that I'm sitting here talking to you is because, well, I enjoy it, but it's I do this so that the school pays me a little bit of money, and I can go buy food, and I can pay my water bill, and I can pay my mortgage, so that I have food, water, and a place to live. Just exactly like those, cavemen 100,000 years ago. Now, he also means that when I say economics drives everything, he means that relationships follow from economics. He means that culture follows from economics. So something like religion for Marx serves quote unquote the 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 system. You're not going to have a religion that gets in the way of a people achieving what they need to achieve to make a living as a unit, as a group. A religion doesn't have to be, entirely correct, but it does have to be useful. It does have to at least not get in the way of that group achieving its means of living. But it's probably going to be useful. When you hear things like, and I don't know if this is true, I kind of suspect it isn't, but when you hear someone saying, well, some of the Jewish dietary laws around pork, for instance, were, kept the old-fashioned Hebrews from getting sick and, getting sick, that's an example of a religion or culture, as it were, enabling the the survival of that group. Another element of culture would be time. If you live in a highly industrial, mechanized world where things start at a certain time, then punctuality is going to be something that matters. In a world where you don't have to start the factory with everybody in place to make it work, then you'll have a culture that's less focused on punctuality. So economics drives culture, and the reason I mention that is because Weber is going to make a different argument later on. Means of production, okay, proletariat and bourgeoisie. Which is kind of fun. when someone says, "Oh, you so bougie," the bougie is a derivative of the French word for bourgeoisie. Um, uh, and you bourgeois is something that you'll hear in pop culture kind of a lot, um, including like bougie. Um, and we tend to think of it as people who are striving or uh, wannabe middle class or upper middle class, which is not exactly the way Marx is using it. Marx is using it to mean the ownership class. That's the bourgeois. The proletariat is everybody else. I should say the bourgeoisie, I think. The proletariat class is everyone else. They're the ones who work for a living. Now, when I mean the ownership class, I mean the ownership class. Um, it's nice if your car is paid off. That doesn't make you a part of the ownership class. It's nice if your house is paid off. Doesn't make you a part of the ownership class. Think of the fact that every single one of those enormous skyscrapers in Atlanta is owned by somebody, and is somebody's collecting rent from all the businesses in those skyscrapers. Those people are the ownership class. It's important there also to understand a difference between wealth and income. If you're making a couple $100,000 a year, you're a comfortable wage worker. And why do I say that? Because if you are part of the ownership class, your income kind of doesn't matter. I mean, of course, you need money to do things. But if you have several $1,000,000 in investments, and whatever you live on is just a percentage of those investments, then you're a part of the ownership class. Now, for Marx, when he talked about the bourgeois, again, early 1800s to mid 1800s, there weren't, corporations like you and I think of with, with thousands and thousands and thousands of shares that you could just buy publicly. I mean, there were some share traded things, but it wasn't like everyone had, AT&T in their 401k. So he's kind of thinking of a family factory, right? Or maybe a big landowner that can rent out the land to sharecroppers. The ownership class owns the houses that get rented. They own the factories that make things. They own the land from which things come. That's what makes them the owners of the means of production. That's what the bourgeoisie is in Marxist thinking. And the proletariat is everyone else who has to work for a living. So if your living is based on collecting wages or salary of any sort, then you're a proletariat. The one caveat that you might throw in there is if you happen to own let's say you own a gas station, right? Convenience store. That's a couple $1,000,000 investment, and you can make a living on it, but you're not Rockefeller. He would call those guys the petty bourgeois, and petty meaning small, petit. And so you're an owner, but you're not a big owner. The big owners, think Musk, Ellison, Gates, Buffett. Those guys. And I would love to have a few million in the bank. I think that would be great. These guys have hundreds of millions, and they're just it's a different class of people. That's just really all it is. Yes. So the proletariat has to work for a living. The bourgeoisie owns everything. Oh, just as a side note, so people sometimes get really worked up over the fact that I mentioned like those guys. Let's say Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett has hundreds of millions of dollars of investments people say, well, how much do you need? If you think of someone like Warren Buffett or um, Elon Musk and say, how much money do they have? How much money do they need? If they've got $100 million in investments and they've got more than that, they're making more on interest on those investments uh, in a day than I make in a whole year. Hell, they may make more per minute than I make in a year. And so you want to say, well, how much do these guys need? It's important to recognize that it's not as if these guys have $100 million and they're just trying to pile it up. I mean, yes, they are. That's the game. But also, what is that $100 million doing? Well, that $100 million is in an investment account. That investment account has shares in other companies. And so that $100 million isn't, sitting in a vault like Scrooge McDuck's gold. That $100 million is actually back out in the economy doing something. If I make $100,000 and invest in my friend's convenience store, it's not like that $100,000 isn't doing anything. My friend is using that $100,000 to help make his convenience store work better. And when the convenience store makes a little bit of money, I'll make a little bit of money, however much proportional. But that money's out there doing something, and that's an important thing to kind of understand. Okay, now, so we've got the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, surplus value. So the third part of this surplus value, of this rather mechanical understanding of Marx, is surplus value. So if there's a meme I see go around the internet every once in a while. It's usually some cartoon guy sitting on a toilet reading a book or something, and it says, "Boss makes $1, I make a dime. That's why I poop on company time." That's essentially that's a Marxist understanding of I guess pooping. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I need something done, if I'm running a moving company and I charge somebody $100 to move stuff for a day's worth of work, like you call me Mike's Moving, and I'm going to take somebody and I'm going to send them out there and I'm going to pay them $50 to do the moving for you, right? So the mover makes $50. You pay $100. That means I make $50. And so, a good capitalist would call that profit. A good Marxist would call that surplus value. But the idea from a Marxist understanding is the value of that person moving boxes for a day was $100. Well, it was $50 to the one person, the guy who moved the boxes. The value was $100 to the person who needed the boxes moved. That surplus value was a profit that I took in between. Now, if I were going to make a free market argument, you'd say, well, a business puts those two things together, and but don't worry about that. If you're thinking of an old-fashioned factory, then something from the mid 1800s, you've got a building somewhere. That building is churning out widgets. The wage workers are making 50-80% of what the factory owner is charging for those things, and then the factory owner is getting rich off of that. It doesn't take it's not a huge leap to recognize that factory owner's wealth is those laborers' labor harvested, right? So Yeah, so those laborers are doing the work. They're the ones who are making the value, right? And that value isn't going to the workers. That value is going to the owner. And so, um, and that was one of the fundamental cracks that Marx thought existed in modern society, is that the wealthy were wealthy because of the work that the laborers were doing, and he very much thought that the laborers would eventually wise up to that and just stop working. And in 1775 or 1800, um, it wasn't like you just moved a factory, right? Nowadays, you close a factory and open another one in another country in a heartbeat. And that just wasn't Marx's world. So he very much thought that one of the fundamental contradictions of capitalism was that the people who were getting rich weren't the people who were making the value. And at least in Marx's time, some of the quality of life of the working class was really bad. And so, why would you keep enriching the people who were not? Why would you keep creating all of this? Why would you keep enriching people who were not helping you in the least? Like, what's the benefit of that? Marx thought that that was a system that would just not hold for any amount of time. Um, you can see it when I recognized this as a young person. All of a sudden, I had some serious trouble with Disney movies and stuff. Here comes the little, all these movies. You've got this beautiful castle, you've got the princess, you've got the happy villagers. But the fact of the matter is that the only reason that the nobility in those feudal worlds got to live that way was because of taxes. Something like 50% of the serfs' crops had to go to the king, and the king, or lord or whatever, was supposed to then keep you from getting raided by the next king. It was essentially a protection racket on one hand, and so you see the big, beautiful, opulent castle, and you're thinking, well, who built that, right? Well, it wasn't the king, and that would have been enforced by force. You don't pay your taxes, you're going to get booted off the land, and that's not going to go well for you. There's one more element of Marx, but I've got to zoom here in a couple minutes, so we'll save alienation for the next one. All right, thank you.